Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional mafia love stories filled with powerful romance, family secrets, redemption, and unforgettable second chances, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support helps us continue bringing heartfelt stories that remind us how love, trust, and forgiveness can change even the darkest destinies. Now, let me tell you a story about one wrong conclusion and the devastating price of believing it. The fastest way to destroy your life is to trust the wrong conclusion. I learned that lesson on a cold Thursday night standing beside a harbor that smelled like salt, diesel, and rain. At 8:17 p.m., I ordered a hit on my biggest rival. At 8:29 p.m., I watched my wife step out of his car. Everything after that felt like watching my own world collapse in slow motion. My name is Declan Mercer, and for most of my life I believed doubt was a weakness. You either trusted someone or you didn't. There was no middle ground, no gray area, no second chances. That belief had built my empire. It had also nearly destroyed my marriage. The ferry terminal sat at the edge of Cape Harbor, 20 miles from town and far away from curious eyes. A single light flickered above the empty parking lot. The ocean wind rattled the chain-link fences. Waves crashed against the docks somewhere beyond the darkness. My men waited in silence. One text from me and Garrett Holloway's night would end differently than he expected. Garrett had spent years trying to undermine everything I built. He smiled in public. He shook hands. He donated money to schools and churches. But beneath the polished image was a man who never stopped looking for weaknesses. And lately, I had begun to suspect he had found mine. The black sedan rolled into the lot exactly on time. I narrowed my eyes. My phone vibrated in my hand. Target confirmed. One of my men texted. Then the rear passenger door opened. My heartbeat stopped. Naomi stepped out. My wife pulled her coat tighter against the wind. Her blonde hair moved across her face. In one hand she carried the old flower journal she never went anywhere without. The worn blue notebook looked almost out of place against the cold industrial backdrop of the harbor. For a second I thought I was imagining it. For a second I convinced myself it had to be someone else. But it wasn't. It was Naomi, the woman I had promised to protect. The woman who hadn't looked me in the eye for nearly a week. 3 days earlier she said she was helping her mother with medical appointments. 2 days earlier she disappeared for 6 hours and refused to explain where she had been. Last night she sat across from me at dinner, turning pages in that flower journal while barely touching her food. Something was wrong. I knew it. But every time I asked she gave me the same answer. I'm handling it. Then she climbed into Garrett Holloway's car. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Every fear I had spent years burying came rushing back. My mother had hidden secrets. My father had ignored them until it was too late. Their marriage ended in silence and regret. I swore I would never repeat their mistakes. Yet there I was staring at evidence I couldn't explain. My phone buzzed again. Boss, do we proceed? I looked at the message. My thumb hovered above the screen. Then I glanced back toward the sedan. Naomi reached into her bag and handed Garrett a thick envelope. He opened it. The color drained from his face. Whatever was inside shocked him. And before I could understand why, another vehicle appeared at the far end of the parking lot. Naomi turned toward it. The fear on her face was immediate, real. And suddenly, for the first time that night, I realized I might not understand this situation at all. The strange thing about betrayal is that it never announces itself. It arrives disguised as coincidence, silence, or a simple unanswered question. Standing there in the cold harbor wind, I watched Naomi's face as the headlights approached from the far end of the parking lot. Fear changed people. It stripped away masks. And what I saw on her face was not the expression of a woman caught doing something wrong. It was the expression of someone who knew something terrible was about to happen. Garrett saw it too. He stepped out of the sedan and looked toward the approaching vehicle. The envelope Naomi had given him was still open in his hands. Even from a distance I could see his posture change. Whatever he had just read had shaken him. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my men. Waiting for your order. I ignored it. For the first time all night, the questions in my head felt louder than my anger. Naomi took a step backward. The flower journal slipped from her arm and landed on the pavement. She immediately bent down to grab it. That notebook mattered to her more than almost anything. I remembered the first time I saw it. 4 years earlier. A small flower shop on Harbor Street. Fresh paint on the walls. Sunlight through the windows. She had been sitting on a stool near the counter, pressing dried flowers between the pages. I had walked in looking for directions and walked out wondering why I could not stop thinking about a woman I had known for less than 10 minutes. Back then life felt simpler. At least that is what I told myself now. The approaching vehicle slowed before reaching them. Its headlights washed across the empty lot. Naomi shielded her eyes with one hand. Garrett said something to her. She answered immediately. Their conversation looked urgent, desperate. Nothing about it resembled a secret romance. Nothing about it matched the story I had been building in my head for days. Then Naomi turned toward the ocean, toward the exact location where I stood hidden in the darkness. My breath caught. There was no way she could see me from that distance. Yet for a second it felt as though she knew I was there. Watching, judging, reaching conclusions without understanding the truth. 3 days earlier, everything had started with a phone call. I remembered coming home after midnight. The house was quiet except for the grandfather clock in the hallway. Naomi sat alone at the kitchen table. Her untouched tea had gone cold. The flower journal was open in front of her. She looked exhausted, pale, distracted. When her phone rang, she grabbed it so quickly that I noticed immediately. She glanced at the screen. Then she walked outside before answering. I stood at the window and watched her through the glass. She stayed on the call for almost 20 minutes. When she finally came back inside, her eyes were red. Who was that? I asked. She hesitated. Only for a second. But I noticed. My mother, she said softly. The answer should have satisfied me. Instead, it planted a seed of doubt. And doubt grows quickly when you water it with silence. Back at the harbor, the driver stepped out of the approaching vehicle. Naomi froze. Garrett froze. Even from where I stood, I could feel the tension shift. Then Garrett looked directly at Naomi and spoke 3 words that I could not hear but somehow understood were important. Naomi's face went completely still. And for the first time that night, I realized this story had started long before I ever knew it existed. Some secrets do not begin with lies. They begin with love. That was something I would not understand until much later. At that moment, all I understood was that Naomi looked terrified, and Garrett Holloway looked like a man carrying a burden he never wanted. The wind swept across the harbor, carrying the scent of rain from the ocean. Clouds drifted over the moon, turning the empty terminal into a world of shadows and uncertainty. The driver who had stepped out of the second vehicle was someone I recognized immediately. Sheriff Miles Turner. Seeing him there made even less sense. Miles had spent 20 years serving Cape Harbor. He avoided politics, avoided business disputes, and avoided men like Garrett and me whenever possible. Yet there he stood, holding a manila folder against his chest as though it contained something precious. Naomi took a hesitant step toward him. Garrett remained where he was. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Miles handed the folder to Naomi. She accepted it with trembling hands. The sight struck me harder than I expected. She looked exhausted. Not guilty. Not deceptive. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a weight alone for too long. 3 days earlier I should have noticed that exhaustion. Instead, I noticed only distance. I remembered waking before sunrise and finding her side of the bed empty. The house was silent except for the coffee machine humming in the kitchen. Naomi sat at the table wrapped in a gray sweater. Her flower journal lay open beside a stack of papers she quickly turned over when I entered the room. You are awake early, I said. She forced a smile. Could not sleep. I poured coffee and sat across from her. For a moment neither of us spoke. We used to fill silence easily. We used to laugh over burnt toast and forgotten grocery lists. Somewhere along the way, silence had become something heavier. Something dangerous. Naomi, I said carefully, if something is wrong you can tell me. Her fingers tightened around her mug. I know. Then tell me. She looked down at the table. Not yet. Not yet. 2 simple words. They haunted me now. Back at the harbor, Naomi opened the folder. Even from a distance I saw old photographs slide into her hands. She stared at them as though she had waited years to see them. Garrett spoke quietly. Miles nodded. The conversation appeared calm, but the tension in Naomi's shoulders never eased. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph. Garrett glanced at it and lowered his head. Miles looked away completely. A strange feeling settled in my chest. I had spent days assuming I was being excluded from a secret. What if the truth was worse? What if Naomi was trying to protect someone? What if that someone was me? My phone vibrated again. This time it was my younger brother Owen. One short message appeared on the screen. Did she show up? The question instantly felt wrong. Too eager. Too interested. I stared at the words while cold realization crept through me. Owen had been the first person to suggest Naomi might be hiding something. The first person to mention Garrett's name. The first person to encourage my suspicions. Across the harbor, Naomi suddenly looked up from the folder. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she whispered something to Garrett. He answered with a slow nod. And for the first time I began to fear that the person lying to me might not be the person I married. The people who love you the most are often the ones carrying the heaviest secrets. I stood motionless in the darkness, staring at the glow of my phone screen. Owen's message refused to leave my mind. Did she show up? Not. Are you there? Not what is happening. Just one question that sounded far too specific. My brother should not have known enough to ask it. The cold wind off the harbor suddenly felt sharper against my skin. Across the parking lot, Naomi carefully gathered the photographs back into the folder. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent. Whatever she was looking at mattered deeply to her. Sheriff Miles spoke again. Naomi listened without interrupting. Then she pressed one hand against her mouth as if trying to hold herself together. I had seen that gesture before. She did it whenever she received difficult news. For months earlier, she stood exactly the same way outside Cape Harbor Medical Center, after learning her mother's heart condition had worsened. She had tried to stay strong, tried to smile. Then she sat in her car for nearly an hour because she did not want anyone to see her cry, including me, especially me. Looking back, that realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. Somewhere along the way, Naomi had stopped bringing her fears to me. 3 days earlier, after our awkward breakfast conversation, I left for a meeting in Portland. The drive should have taken less than an hour. Instead, I spent the entire trip thinking about her expression, about the hesitation in her voice, about the papers she had hidden beneath the flower journal. By noon, I convinced myself I was imagining things. By evening, that confidence disappeared. When I returned home, I found Naomi sitting on the back porch wrapped in a blanket. The autumn air was cold enough to make her cheeks pink. She was staring at the ocean beyond our property line. The flower journal rested in her lap. "You have been doing that a lot lately," I said as I sat beside her. "Doing what?" "Looking worried." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I am just getting older." "You are 31. "Exactly. Ancient." Under different circumstances we would have laughed. Instead, silence settled between us again. Then she reached into the journal and removed a pressed white daisy. She held it carefully between her fingers. "Do you remember this?" she asked. I nodded immediately. It came from the bouquet I bought the day we opened her flower shop. She had preserved one flower from that arrangement and kept it for years. "Some things survive longer than people expect," she said quietly. At the time I thought she was talking about flowers. Now I wondered if she meant something else entirely. Back at the harbor, Naomi closed the folder. Miles gave her a sympathetic look before walking back toward his vehicle. Garrett remained beside her. Neither of them appeared relieved. If anything, they seemed burdened by whatever truth had just been uncovered. Then Naomi reached into her coat pocket and removed her phone. Seconds later, mine vibrated. I looked down. My heartbeat instantly accelerated. A new message appeared on the screen. It was from Naomi. Sent less than 10 seconds ago. One sentence. One sentence that made every assumption I had built over the past week begin to crumble. "Please trust me a little longer." Trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to build and only seconds to question. I stared at Naomi's message while the harbor wind rattled the fencing behind me. "Please trust me a little longer." 6 words. That was all. Yet somehow those 6 words carried more weight than every explanation she had refused to give me over the past week. Across the parking lot, Naomi slipped her phone back into her coat pocket. She did not know I was there. At least I did not think she did. But the timing of the message felt deliberate. Almost as if she sensed my presence somewhere in the darkness. Garrett said something quietly. Naomi nodded. Then she looked down at the folder again. The photographs remained spread across the top page. Old photographs. Faded photographs. The kind people keep when they are searching for answers instead of memories. A strange feeling settled in my chest. 3 days earlier, I had made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. I hired someone to quietly look into Garrett Holloway's recent activities. I expected business records, financial reports, evidence of another attempt to interfere with my operations. Instead, the investigator returned with something unexpected. Photographs. Not of Garrett. Of Naomi. Several images showed her entering the county records building. Others showed her leaving the sheriff's office. One showed her sitting alone on a bench outside the courthouse holding her flower journal against her chest. At the time, those photographs only increased my suspicions. Now they raised entirely different questions. Why would Naomi spend days searching public records? Why involve Sheriff Miles Turner? Why meet Garrett if she truly distrusted him as much as she always claimed? Back at the harbor, Miles climbed into his vehicle and drove away. The parking lot felt emptier without him there. Naomi and Garrett remained standing beside the sedan. Their conversation continued. Calm. Serious. Focused. Then Garrett reached into his jacket and handed Naomi a small envelope. She accepted it carefully. Whatever was inside appeared important enough that she immediately tucked it into her journal. My phone vibrated once more. Another message. This time from Owen. Well, did you finally get your answer? I frowned. The wording bothered me even more than before. Owen was acting like someone waiting for a prediction to come true. Not someone concerned about his brother's marriage. Suddenly I remembered a conversation from 5 days earlier. We had been sitting in my office overlooking Harbor Street. Rain tapped against the windows. Owen leaned back in his chair and casually mentioned seeing Garrett's car near Naomi's flower shop. At the time it seemed like harmless information. Helpful information. Now I wondered if it had been something else entirely. A seed. A suggestion. A carefully planted doubt. Across the harbor, Naomi finally turned away from Garrett. She held the flower journal tightly against her chest and began walking toward her own car. Halfway there she stopped. She looked out toward the ocean. Toward the darkness. Toward me. Then she whispered something I could not hear. Garrett followed her gaze. His expression changed immediately. The color left his face. And in that instant I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Garrett Holloway had just realized someone else knew the truth. The moment you stop looking for the obvious answer is usually the moment the truth finally starts revealing itself. Garrett's reaction stayed with me long after Naomi walked away. He had looked directly toward the darkness where I stood hidden. Not surprised. Not angry. Concerned. As if my presence created a problem neither he nor Naomi wanted. That bothered me more than anything I had seen that night. I waited until Naomi's car disappeared onto the coastal highway before finally moving. The harbor felt colder now. Empty. The distant sound of waves echoed against the docks. Garrett remained beside his sedan for several seconds before climbing inside and driving away in the opposite direction. Within minutes I was alone. My men were still waiting for instructions. None came. The order I had given hours earlier no longer made sense. Too many questions remained unanswered. As I walked back toward my vehicle, my thoughts drifted to something Naomi once told me. It happened during our first year of marriage. We were sitting on the floor of her flower shop after closing. The power had gone out during a storm, leaving us surrounded by candlelight and the scent of fresh roses. Naomi was pressing flowers into her journal, while I repaired an antique pocket watch. You know what the problem with assumptions is? She asked suddenly. What? They feel exactly like facts until you discover they are not. I laughed at the time. Now those words felt uncomfortably accurate. The drive home took nearly 30 minutes. Rain began falling halfway there. Soft at first, then steady enough to blur the windshield. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house stood dark against the shoreline. Naomi's car was already there. A warm light glowed from the kitchen window. For a moment, I simply sat behind the wheel listening to the rain tap against the glass. Part of me wanted to walk inside and demand answers. Another part feared what those answers might be. When I finally entered the house, I found Naomi exactly where I expected, sitting at the kitchen table. Her flower journal rested beside a mug of untouched tea. The manila folder was nowhere in sight. She looked up when I entered. Tired eyes. Tense shoulders. The expression of someone carrying too much alone. "You are home late," she said. Quietly. "So are you." The words slipped out before I could stop them. A brief shadow crossed her face. Not guilt. Sadness. "I suppose I am." Silence followed. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. Rain tapped against the windows. Neither of us moved. Then Naomi surprised me. She stood and walked toward me. Slowly. Carefully. As though approaching a frightened animal. "Declan," she said softly, "have you ever trusted someone without understanding everything?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Exactly what I asked.
Istert daher.
She stared back. For a second I considered telling her everything. The harbor. Garrett. Sheriff Miles. The photographs. The investigation. Instead I asked the only question that mattered. "Are you in trouble?" Her eyes widened slightly. Then she looked away. That tiny reaction told me more than any answer could have. Naomi took a slow breath. "I am trying to prevent something terrible from happening." My heart sank. "To who?" She hesitated. Just long enough. Then she whispered the last answer I expected to hear. "To you." Some words change the direction of your life forever. To you. Naomi's voice was barely above a whisper. Yet those two words echoed through every corner of the kitchen. The rain continued falling outside. The grandfather clock kept ticking. Somewhere in the distance, waves rolled against the shoreline. Everything sounded normal except my heartbeat. "What does that mean?" I asked. Naomi looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had spent weeks carrying a burden that grew heavier every day. She glanced toward the flower journal on the table. Her fingers brushed its worn cover. "I cannot explain everything yet." The answer immediately frustrated me. "Then explain what you can." For a moment I thought she might refuse. Instead, she slowly sat back down and stared into her untouched tea. 3 weeks ago, someone contacted my mother. The statement caught me off guard. Who? We did not know at first. I pulled out a chair across from her. The tension in the room felt almost unbearable now. Naomi took a deep breath. The caller knew things about my family that should not have been possible. Things that disappeared more than 20 years ago. My mind immediately returned to the photographs I had seen at the harbor. Old photographs. County records. Sheriff Miles. Suddenly the pieces began forming a shape I still could not fully understand. This has something to do with your father, does it not? Naomi's eyes widened. Just slightly. Enough. Her father was the one subject she almost never discussed. Growing up, she had always believed he abandoned the family when she was 12 years old. It was an old wound. One she rarely allowed anyone to touch. Even me. Naomi lowered her gaze. That is what I thought too. Thought. Not think. The single word sent a chill through me. What changed? She looked toward the rain-streaked window. Evidence. The room fell silent again. I remembered the first time she ever told me about her father. We had been dating for less than 6 months. We sat on a weathered bench overlooking the harbor. She told the story calmly. Too calmly. As if repeating it enough times had drained the pain from it. Yet afterward, she sat quietly for nearly 20 minutes watching the ocean. That silence revealed more than her words ever had. Back then I promised myself I would never give her another reason to feel abandoned. The memory stung now. The records Garrett helped locate suggest my father never left voluntarily, Naomi said quietly. Someone erased part of the truth.
Istert daher.
Every instinct told me Garrett's involvement made no sense. The man had spent years opposing me in business matters. Why would he help Naomi uncover family history? Almost as if reading my thoughts, she answered before I could ask. Garrett knew someone connected to the original investigation. Investigation. Another word that did not belong in a simple family story. My phone buzzed on the table. Both of us looked down. Owen's name appeared on the screen. Calling. Naomi's expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. The same expression I saw at the harbor. She stood so quickly her chair scraped across the floor. Do not answer that. The urgency in her voice froze me. I looked from the phone to her face. Naomi. She shook her head. Please. The call continued ringing. Then it stopped. A second later, a new message appeared. One sentence. Short. Simple. Terrifying. We need to talk before she tells you everything. There are moments when the truth stands directly in front of you, but you are still too afraid to see it. I stared at Owen's message while the kitchen seemed to grow smaller around me. We need to talk before she tells you everything. The words felt wrong the moment I read them. Not because of what they said, but because of what they implied. Owen already knew what Naomi was about to reveal. Somehow he had known before I did. Across the table, Naomi looked pale. Her eyes never left the phone screen. For several seconds neither of us spoke. The rain tapped steadily against the windows. The grandfather clock continued its slow rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Every second felt heavier than the one before. Finally, Naomi sat back down. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the flower journal. He knows, she whispered. Who knows what? I asked. She closed her eyes briefly. That I found the records. My stomach tightened. What records? Naomi opened the journal and carefully removed the small envelope Garrett had given her at the harbor. Until now, I had not even realized she still carried it. She slid several old photographs across the table. Black and white images. A courthouse. A small house near the edge of town. A younger version of her mother standing beside a man I had never seen before. Then she placed one final photograph in front of me. The air seemed to leave my lungs. It showed her father. Older than in the family pictures I had seen years ago. Older but unmistakably alive. The date printed on the corner of the photograph was only 8 years old. 8 years. Not 20. Not the disappearance everyone believed. 8 years. That is impossible, I said. Naomi gave a sad smile. That is exactly what I thought. I picked up the photograph and studied it again. The image was grainy, but clear enough to remove any doubt. Her father had not vanished when she was 12. Someone had hidden the truth. Someone had allowed Naomi and her mother to believe a lie for nearly 2 decades. Who took this picture? I asked. Sheriff Miles found it in an archived case file. My mind raced. Nothing about this made sense. Why would anyone hide something like this? Naomi looked toward the window. Toward the darkness beyond the glass. Because my father was never the real target. The statement hung in the air between us. I felt a chill run through my chest. Then who was? For the first time that night, Naomi hesitated. Not because she did not know the answer. Because she was afraid of saying it out loud. I knew that look. I had seen it before. The day her mother was diagnosed. The day our house caught fire from an electrical fault years ago. The day she stood beside her best friend's hospital bed. Naomi only looked like that when she was preparing to face something she desperately wished was not true. The records suggest someone wanted access to information, she said quietly. Information my father discovered before he disappeared.
Ister daher.
What information? Her eyes slowly lifted to meet mine. Fear filled them. Real fear. Then she whispered the answer. Something connected to your family. The room fell silent. Completely silent. My pulse hammered in my ears. Somewhere deep inside, a memory surfaced. A conversation with Owen months ago. Casual. Forgettable. At least I thought it was. He had asked questions about old family records. Old business archives. Things I barely remembered. At the time I dismissed it. Now, sitting across from Naomi, a terrible possibility began taking shape. And for the first time in years, I found myself wondering whether I truly knew my own brother at all. The most dangerous discoveries are not the ones that expose strangers. They are the ones that expose people you love. I sat frozen at the kitchen table while Naomi's words echoed through my mind. Something connected to your family. Outside, the rain continued falling over Cape Harbor. Inside, the air felt impossibly still. I looked down at the photograph again. Naomi's father. Alive 8 years ago. Smiling at something beyond the camera. A man who had supposedly disappeared almost 20 years earlier. Nothing about that image belonged in reality. Yet there it was. Proof that someone had rewritten an entire family's history. Naomi slowly gathered the photographs and returned them to the folder. Her hands were steady now. Not because she felt calm, but because she had finally reached the point where fear no longer mattered. I knew that feeling. I had lived it myself. There is more, she said quietly. My chest tightened. Of course there was more. There always was. She opened the folder again and removed a yellow document. The paper looked old enough to crumble at the edges. Several names had been blacked out. Dates were partially missing. But one detail remained visible.
À signature.
My father's signature. I stared at it. The familiar handwriting was impossible to mistake. Miles found this in a sealed archive, Naomi said. Most of the file was removed years ago. I could barely hear her. My mind had already traveled backward through time. My father had died 12 years earlier. He rarely discussed business. Rarely discussed family history. Whenever questions arose about old disputes or forgotten alliances, he always changed the subject. At the time I assumed he was protecting us. Now I wondered if he had been protecting secrets. What exactly was he involved in? I asked. Naomi looked away. We do not know yet. Yet. That word again. Another piece of a puzzle nobody seemed willing to complete. Then my phone buzzed once more. A new message appeared. This time not from Owen. From Garrett Holloway. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. 24 hours ago I would have ignored anything Garrett sent. Now I opened the message immediately. It contained only an address and a time. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. No explanation. No context. Just one final sentence beneath it. Bring Naomi. Do not tell Owen. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Naomi read the message over my shoulder. The color drained from her face. He finally found it, she whispered. Found what? I asked. She hesitated. Then she looked directly into my eyes. The person who helped hide my father. Every instinct inside me screamed that this was impossible. Every piece of evidence said otherwise. The grandfather clock struck. Midnight. The sound echoed through the house. Naomi flinched. I noticed immediately. What is it? Her gaze shifted toward the front window. Toward the darkness outside. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she whispered 4 words that sent a chill through my entire body. We are too late. Before I could ask what she meant, headlights appeared at the end of our driveway. Headlights have a way of making ordinary moments feel like warnings. Naomi and I stood frozen in the kitchen as the beam swept across the rain-soaked driveway. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she clutched the folder against her chest so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I had seen fear in her eyes before, but never like this. This was not fear for herself. This was fear for what came next. The vehicle rolled to a stop outside the house. The engine remained running. Rain drummed against the roof. My pulse hammered in my ears. Naomi looked toward the front door. It should not be happening this fast, she whispered. I stepped closer. Tell me what is going on. Her eyes filled with frustration. Not because she wanted to hide the truth, but because she was running out of time to explain it. The records Garrett found were connected to an old investigation. Someone spent years making sure those files stayed buried. Who? I asked. Before she could answer, a knock echoed through the house. 3 slow knocks. Deliberate. Calm. Somehow that felt worse than urgency. Naomi closed her eyes. Declan, promise me something. What? No matter who is standing on the other side of that door, listen before you decide what to believe. The word struck me harder than she realized. For days I had done the exact opposite. I had decided what to believe before listening at all. Another knock sounded. I walked toward the front entrance while Naomi remained behind me. Every instinct told me to be cautious. Every instinct also told me that the answers we had been chasing were finally here. I opened the door. Sheriff Miles Turner stood on the porch holding a waterproof document case beneath one arm. Rain soaked the shoulders of his jacket. His expression looked older than it had at the harbor. More tired. More resigned. Sorry to come this late, he said quietly. But we have a problem. Naomi appeared beside me immediately. What happened? Miles stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For several seconds he simply stared at the folder in Naomi's hands. Then he exhaled heavily. The storage unit was empty tonight. My stomach tightened. What storage unit? Miles looked directly at me. The one containing the remaining evidence connected to your wife's father. Silence filled the room. Naomi's face lost all color. That is not possible, she whispered. Nobody else knew where it was. Miles hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Somebody had known. Somebody close enough to stay ahead of every discovery. Somebody who seemed to know exactly when Naomi got closer to the truth. Slowly, Miles opened the document case and removed a thin file. He handed it to Naomi. She flipped through the pages. Then she stopped. Her entire body went still. What is it? I asked. Naomi looked up at me with tears in her eyes. This account number. Her voice trembled. It appears throughout every record. I frowned. What does it mean? She swallowed hard. Then she turned the file toward me. The account belonged to a trust established nearly 20 years ago. A trust created under one name. Owen Mercer. My brother. Some betrayals happen in a single moment. Others are built slowly year after year, until the truth becomes impossible to recognize. I stared at the document in my hands while the world around me seemed to fade into silence. Owen Mercer. My brother's name sat there in black ink beside financial records that stretched back nearly 20 years. 20 years. The number refused to make sense. Owen was younger than me. Reckless sometimes. Ambitious more often than he should have been. But this felt impossible. Naomi lowered herself into a chair. The file remained open in front of her. Sheriff Miles stood near the kitchen counter, watching both of us with the expression of a man who wished he had better news to deliver. Rain continued sliding down the windows. The house felt colder than before. There has to be an explanation, I said. The words sounded weak even to me. Miles did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the document case and removed another folder. Smaller. Older. He placed it on the table. I thought the same thing, he said quietly. Then I found this. Naomi looked up first. I watched her carefully open the folder. Several photographs rested inside. More records. More names. More dates. Then she stopped turning pages. Her eyes widened. Slowly, she slid one photograph toward me. The image showed two men standing outside a marina office nearly 18 years ago. One of them was Naomi's father. The other was someone I recognized instantly. Owen. Much younger. Barely out of college. Smiling directly at the camera. My stomach dropped. That cannot be real, I whispered. But it was. The timestamp. The location. Everything matched. Naomi's father knew Owen long before I ever met Naomi. Long before either of us understood any of this existed. Garrett discovered the connection 3 weeks ago, Naomi said softly. That is why he contacted me. Suddenly everything clicked into place. The secret meetings. The hidden records. The county archives. The photographs. Garrett had not been trying to hurt me. He had been helping Naomi uncover the truth. A truth that somehow led directly back to my own family. Shame settled heavily in my chest. I thought about the harbor. About the assumptions I made. About the conclusions I reached before asking a single honest question. Naomi had spent weeks trying to protect me while I quietly questioned her loyalty. The realization hurt more than I expected. Naomi looked at me. Really looked at me. This is why I could not tell you. I nodded slowly. For once I understood. If she had accused Owen without evidence, I never would have believed her. I barely believed it now. Miles cleared his throat. There is one more thing. None of us wanted there to be one more thing. Yet there always was. He slid a folded document across the table. Naomi opened it. Her hand immediately flew to her mouth. What is it? I asked. She looked at me with tears gathering in her eyes. Then she turned the paper around. It was a recent transfer request. Dated 4 days ago. Signed electronically. Authorized by Owen Mercer. The destination line contained a single name. Daniel Whitaker. Naomi's father. And for the first time in 20 years there was an active address attached to it. Hope can be more frightening than despair. Despair asks nothing from you. Hope demands that you risk your heart one more time. I stared at the address attached to Daniel Whitaker's name while Naomi sat motionless beside me. 20 years of questions suddenly had a destination. 20 years of grief now had a street, a town, and a mailbox. The realization felt unreal. Naomi's hands trembled as she folded the document and slipped it back into the folder. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. That was who she was. Strong long after most people would have broken. Sheriff Miles checked his watch. If you are going, you should leave before sunrise. Naomi looked up. You think he is still there? Miles hesitated. I think someone wanted him moved. That transfer request was filed only 4 days ago, which means somebody got nervous. I already knew who that somebody might be. Owen. The name sat in my chest like a stone. Every memory from the last few weeks looked different now. Every conversation. Every warning. Every suggestion that Naomi was hiding something. The pattern was impossible to ignore. He had not simply known about the investigation. He had been tracking it. Naomi slowly stood and carried the folder to the kitchen counter. For a moment she rested both hands against the surface and lowered her head.
He walked over quietly.
Naomi. She looked at me. The sadness in her expression nearly broke me. I am sorry, I said. The words came out rougher than expected. For what? For doubting you. Silence filled the space between us. Then she gave a small, tired smile. You were scared. That is not an excuse. Her eyes softened. No. But it is the truth. Those words hurt because they were kind. I did not deserve kindness from her. Not after everything I had assumed. Not after standing at that harbor convinced I understood a story I had never bothered to hear. Naomi opened the flower journal and carefully placed the documents. Inside, between the pages rested the pressed white daisy she had preserved for years. She touched it gently. I used to imagine this moment all the time, she said. Finding him. Your father. She nodded. Sometimes I imagined being angry. Sometimes relieved. Sometimes I imagined walking away. She looked down at the flower. But now that it is real, I do not know what I feel. I understood that better than she realized. Some truths do not bring closure. They bring more questions. Miles gathered his documents and headed for the door. Before leaving, he paused. One more thing. Naomi and I both looked up. Garrett called an hour ago. He wants to meet before you leave. I frowned. Why? Miles shook his head. He would not say. After the sheriff left, the house felt strangely quiet. The rain had finally stopped. Moonlight reflected off the ocean beyond the windows. Naomi stood beside me watching the dark water. Do you trust Garrett? I asked. She considered the question carefully. I trust what he is trying to do. That is not the same thing. No, she admitted. It is not. My phone buzzed on the counter. A new message appeared. This one from Garrett. Only a single sentence. Meet me at the marina at 6. Come alone. Beneath the message was an attached photograph. I opened it. Then every breath left my body. The image showed Naomi's father standing beside someone neither of us expected to see. My brother. The truth rarely arrives the way you expect. Sometimes it comes in the form of a photograph that changes everything you thought you knew. I stared at the image on my phone while Naomi stood beside me in complete silence. Her father looked older than the photographs we had found earlier, but there was no doubt it was him. Standing beside him was Owen. Not as enemies. Not as strangers. They were talking. Calmly. Comfortably. Like two men who had known each other for years. The marina meeting happened at sunrise. Fog drifted across the water. Fishing boats rocked gently against their slips. The town was still asleep when Naomi and I arrived. Garrett was already there waiting beside an old wooden dock. For the first time since this began, he looked relieved. Not happy. Relieved. As though carrying the truth had exhausted him. Naomi walked directly toward him. Where is he? She asked. Garrett nodded toward a small building near the far end of the marina. Neither of us hesitated. We crossed the dock together. Naomi's hand found mine halfway there. I held it tightly, not because she needed strength, because I did. The door opened before we reached it. An older man stepped outside. Gray hair, weathered face, familiar eyes. Naomi stopped walking. The entire world seemed to stop with her. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then the man smiled sadly. Naomi. One word. 20 years of absence. 20 years of questions. Naomi's flower journal slipped from her hands onto the dock. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Dad. Her voice broke on the final word. He nodded. That was all it took. She crossed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. I looked away for a moment because some reunions are too personal to witness directly. When I finally looked back, both of them were crying. Not from sadness. From relief. Later, sitting inside the marina office, the remaining pieces finally fell into place. Daniel Whitaker had discovered financial records decades earlier that implicated powerful people. Some connected to old business operations. Some connected to my father. Some connected to people who wanted certain truths buried forever. Owen had learned about those records years later. Unlike my father, who wanted the secrets hidden, Owen wanted control over them. He spent years tracking Daniel's whereabouts and manipulating information whenever the past threatened to surface. That was why he monitored Naomi's investigation. That was why he encouraged my suspicions. He wanted us divided. Easier to control. Easier to mislead. The realization left me feeling hollow. I had spent weeks doubting the wrong person. Naomi never betrayed me. She protected me. Even when it cost her peace. Even when it cost her trust. That afternoon, after Daniel finished telling his story, Naomi and I returned home. The ocean shimmered beneath the evening sun. The storm was finally gone. She sat on the back porch with her flower journal open. In her lap, carefully, she placed a new flower between the pages. A white daisy, the same kind she had preserved for years.
He sat beside her.
What does that one mean? I asked. Naomi smiled. Really smiled. The kind of smile I had not seen in months.
Seconde chance.
I nodded. Then I looked out at the water. Funny thing about second chances. They do not begin when the truth is revealed. They begin when you choose to trust it. And that was the day I learned the woman I thought I was losing had been saving me all along. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this journey. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in second chances, forgiveness, and the power of truth. Remember, trust can be broken in a moment, but genuine love is often revealed in the choices we make after the truth comes to light. Until next time, take care of the people you love, and never let fear speak louder than your heart.